Hello, welcome to Pragim Technologies. I am Venkat. This is part 19 of SQL Server. In this session, we will learn creating and executing stored procedures with output parameters and learn about some of the useful system stored procedures. Now, before continuing with this session, I strongly recommend to watch part 18 of this video series. In part 18 of this video series, we have seen how to create stored procedures with input parameters. In this session, we will see how to create a stored procedure with output parameter. To create a stored procedure with output parameter, we use the keywords out or output. If you look at the stored procedure that we have here, sp get employee count by gender, okay, this procedure has got two parameters, at gender and at employee count. And if you look at the differences between these two parameters, at employee count has got output keyword, whereas at gender doesn't have it. So this output keyword indicates that this at employee count is an output parameter and at gender is an input parameter by default because it doesn't have the output keyword. Okay, and if you look at the procedure definition itself, all we are doing is we are passing in the gender. For example, if you pass in male as the gender, what this query is going to do is it's going to count from employee table how many males are there, and then whatever count you're getting, you're using that count to initialize this output parameter. Okay, now let's see how to actually create the stored procedure. So if you look at this, we have this employee table and we have got some males and females. Now we are about to create a stored procedure which gives us the employee count by gender. And obviously to create a stored procedure, we use create procedure command. So create procedure and then give the stored procedure a meaningful name, sp get employee count by gender. Okay, we want to get the employee count by gender, and this procedure, obviously if you want the total count of employees by gender, at the minimum you have to pass the gender information, like do you want the male employee count or female employee count. So at gender, and this is going to be of type envarchar. Let's say 20 is the size, and then we are going to have another parameter called employee count. Okay, and this is going to be of type integer, and I want this to be of type output parameter as begin end. So what do we want to do now? We want to select the total number of employees for the passed in gender, and to do that we will say select. Now if you look at this, select count of star, for example, from TBL employee. This will give us the total number of employees in the table, but we don't want total number of employees. We want the total number of male or female employees depending on what gets passed into the stored procedure. So where gender is equal to, now if I say gender is equal to male, then it will give us the total number of male employees, which is 7. But we don't want to be hard coding the gender like this. Instead, we want to be using the parameter which the user is going to pass when he invokes the stored procedure. Okay, now when we execute this, look at this, we get that count and we are selecting it directly, and we get the result set, but we don't want to do that. Instead, we want to initialize this output parameter. So that's why we will say select at employee count is equal to, so what's going to happen, whatever we get, whatever this count function returns, instead of selecting it as a result set, we are passing it to the output variable, so the output variable gets output parameter gets initialized. Okay, and instead of saying star, it's always good to use the column name there. So let's use ID. So that's it. So let's create the stored procedure. So we have successfully created a stored procedure with an output parameter. Alright, now to execute the stored procedure with output parameter, now we have created the stored procedure, we want to execute that. Okay, now usually we have seen how to execute a stored procedure with input parameters in the previous session. Okay, to execute a stored procedure with output parameter, it's slightly different. Okay, now you know that this stored procedure is accepting two parameters. One is the gender parameter and the other one is the employee count. Gender is an input parameter, employee count is an output parameter. Okay, now obviously input parameter means you have to pass something to the stored procedure, whereas output parameter will return something back to you. Okay, now when a stored procedure returns something back to you, you want to hold it somewhere, obviously in a variable. That's why you first create a variable to receive the value. Okay, so I'm creating a variable called @employeeTotal, and notice the data type of this variable should match the data type of your output parameter. Why? Because essentially we get a value of this data type back. So we want a variable, basically to hold the value that is going to come out of the stored procedure. So that's why we are creating a variable of integer data type. Okay, and then when we actually execute the stored procedure, look at this, we are executing the stored procedure here. We pass the value for gender, which is nothing but the male, and then what is this query going to do? It's going to count the number of males, and then it's going to initialize this output parameter. Okay, so we are passing in a variable which is going to receive that count. In this case, @employeeTotal receives the value, and then finally we print that value. So let's see how to execute this. Okay, so obviously to execute this stored procedure, okay, first we need to declare a variable. Let's say @totalCount maybe, of type integer. So the data type of this variable should match the data type of the parameter, the output parameter. Okay, and then what you're doing is you're executing the stored procedure. Which stored procedure is that? SP employee get count by gender. And then when you execute, look at this, when you execute that stored procedure, obviously you have to pass in for which gender do you want to count the number of employees, male or female. You have to pass that input value for that input parameter. But whereas for the output parameter you don't have to pass a value, you will get a value back. So here we want to check the count of male employees, and then we pass this variable to receive the value back. Okay, now when you pass that, you need to specify the output keyword, otherwise it will be null. Okay, so that's why to indicate to the stored procedure, okay, this @totalCount is an output parameter, you have to specify here that you can either say out or output, it doesn't really matter. Okay, and then finally what you can do is print the value, or you can pass it to another stored procedure or do anything you want. Okay, so when we execute this, we should get that value back, which is 7 here. Okay, now look at this, if I don't pass the output keyword there, and if I try to execute that, look at this, it doesn't print anything because this is null. Okay, it doesn't receive the value if you don't specify the output keyword, and when you declare it, if you haven't initialized the @totalCount to anything, it will basically be null, and you will end up printing null. And to quickly check that, you can check that here. If maybe @totalCount is null, maybe we want to say print @totalCount is null. All we are doing is we are checking if it is null or not. Else, if it is not null, we want to print a message saying that it is not null. Print @totalCount is not null. Now if we execute that, look at this, we didn't specify the out keyword. If we don't specify the out keyword, this variable will not receive the value, and since we haven't initialized this variable anywhere else, it is going to stay null, and if it is null, it will print this line. So let's execute this. So when we execute these lines, look at this, at total count is null. But on the other hand, if you pass in something, if you pass the out keyword, what's going to happen, this variable is going to be initialized with the count of employees of that gender. Okay, so now when I execute this, you should get the message saying that at total count is not null, which means it has got some value. Alright, so keep that in mind whenever you execute a stored procedure with output parameter. For that output parameter, you have to specify the out keyword, otherwise it will not be initialized and it will always stay null. Alright. Okay, so if you don't specify the output keyword when executing the stored procedure, the at employee total variable will be null, and we have just seen that. Okay, now here we are passing, look at this, we are if you look at the stored procedure, the first parameter is gender parameter and the second parameter is the employee count. So we are passing in that order. Okay, so the first value will be used by this parameter, the second one will be used by this parameter. Okay, now if you use the parameter names when you're passing values to the stored procedure, then the order doesn't really matter. For example, look at this. Let's say I want to pass my output parameter first. How do I do that? You have to use the parameter names. Okay, let's get rid of this here. Okay, so what's the parameter name? It's at employee count. So that at employee count is equal to this output parameter, and you still should have the out keyword, and then you can say at gender is equal to, I want to pass male. Okay, now look at this, I altered the order in which we are passing the parameters, but since I specified the names of the parameter, the stored procedure knows which value is for which parameter. Okay, so obviously if I execute this now, it should work without any issue. So we get 7. Okay, 7 male employees. Alright, there are some extremely useful system stored procedures which we can use for a variety of purposes. For example, here I have this sp_help procedure. It's a system stored procedure, and in the last session we have learned that any procedure that starts with sp underscore is usually a system stored procedure, and user defined stored procedure shouldn't be having that name. Okay, so if you see this sp_help system stored procedure, this procedure can be used to view the information about the stored procedure, like parameter names, their data types, etc. Okay, let's see this in action. Now if I want to find out more information about the stored procedure that we have just created, I can use sp_help, take the stored procedure, paste there, and when we press select those two, and when I press execute, you should see name of the stored procedure, and look at this, the type is stored procedure, this is a stored procedure, and when we have created it, the parameters it has got, their data types, etc. Okay, so you can use sp_help, or if you don't want to use that system stored procedure, you can go to programmability, stored procedures folder, refresh, and you should see your stored procedure there, and if you expand that, you should see the parameters that it is expecting. Alright. Okay, now this sp_help, you can use that with any database object, for example tables, views, triggers, etc. For example, look at this, when I use this sp_help with this tbl employee, what information do I get? I get all the information about the different columns that are present in this table, their data types, etc. Any indexes this table has got, any constraints this table has got. Basically you get the information about the object. Okay, it could be table, view, stored procedure, trigger, etc. So sp_help work with any database object. And if you don't want to use this system stored procedure, you can graphically look at the information about any database object again, or what you can do is simply highlight that object and press Alt F1. That's a keyboard shortcut, and you get the exact same information again. Okay, So that's about SP underscore help system stored procedure. And in part 18 of this video series, we have seen how, what is the purpose of SP underscore help text. If you want to view the definition of a stored procedure, we use SP underscore help text system stored procedure. Okay. Similarly, even if it is a stored procedure with output parameters, you can still use SP underscore help text system stored procedure. Okay, press F5, you should see the text of the system stored procedure. And remember, in part 18 we have seen how to encrypt a stored procedure. If you have encrypted a stored procedure, you cannot view the text of that stored procedure. Okay, and finally this SP underscore depends, which is really useful. Okay, this stored procedure basically is used to view the dependencies of the stored procedure. For example, if a stored procedure depends on a table, look at this. This stored procedure depends. So this stored procedure, where are we getting the information from? This stored procedure is getting the information from TBL employee table. So this stored procedure depends on this table. Okay, so when I execute this, so we get that information. Okay, this stored procedure is depending on these columns ID and gender present in this table TBL employee. Okay, now how is this useful? This is useful because let's say I want to drop TBL employee table. Okay, if I drop, when I say drop, I'm going to delete that table. So if I delete TBL employee table and if I try to execute the stored procedure, what happens? It will throw an error because this stored procedure is using that table, and if that table is not present, obviously we get an error. Okay, so I can quickly check, okay, are there any dependencies? And if there are dependencies, I wouldn't delete this table. Okay, so what happens if I delete it? Instead of deleting it, let's rename it to something. So TBL employee 11, I have just renamed it to that. It's as good as deleting it. And now if we execute the stored procedure, look at what's going to happen. It will throw an error saying invalid object name TBL employee. Okay, so you can quickly check, okay, what are the dependencies. Okay, so since you want to delete this table, you can check that table itself. So you can use that TBL employee table here, and when you press F5, look at this, there is a stored procedure that is referring this TBL employee table. Okay, so if you look at the messages here in the current database, the specified object, which is nothing but TBL employee, the specified object is referenced by the following, which is nothing but this system stored procedure. So it's saying us this this stored procedure is dependent on this TBL employee table. So deleting this table may affect the stored procedure. Okay, so we'll be cautious when we are about to do that. So SP underscore depends, view the dependencies of the stored procedure. This system stored procedure is very useful, especially if you want to check if there are any stored procedures that are referencing a table that you are about to drop. SP underscore depends can also be used with other database objects like tables, etc. On this slide, you can find resources for ASP.NET and C# interview questions. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.